Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Hello and welcome to the World Built Environment webinar series. Today we are talking about the RICS Sustainability Report 2024, a year in progress. My name is Anil Sahani. I work for the RICS. I'm a member of the RICS as well. My work relates to sustainability, and my colleague Kisa Zehra leads this report. She's away, so I get the opportunity to talk about this report today. So you will see that we have prepared this annual report. This report, on the next slide, I will try to present to you the key findings of this report before we invite our panel members today to discuss important things surrounding our annual report. So the sustainability in our series of reports is done through a sentiment survey. It's a flagship report that we produce. It's used to give insights into how sustainability initiatives are being adopted across the built environment. The way this survey is run is that we have our marquee sentiment surveys that are run every quarter by our economics team. So this report actually connects back to our global commercial property monitor and the global construction monitor. These are two monitors surveys that are conducted every quarter. So in one of those quarters, we add additional sustainability related questions, and based on those responses, our report is produced. It has been a very important report for us and our members. Over 4,000 members and non-members respond from across the globe. This year, we had responses from 32 countries. And in the next slide, you will see that we basically produce a very high-level RICS Sustainable Building Index, which is measured by essentially looking at the proportion of respondents who say that they see an increasing demand in green buildings, minus the proportion of respondents that are seeing a fall in the demand of green buildings. So this index is a very important top line indicator of where the sentiment on sustainable buildings lie each year. We have seen a consistent sustainability building index. As you can see, for the past 4 years, it has generally remained positive, meaning the proportion of respondents who see an increase in demand is always higher than proportion of respondents that see a fall in the demand. So this basically suggests that the occupiers and investors sentiment shows a demand for green buildings continue to rise globally. Next, we'll show you how this response is seen by various world markets and regions that RICS works in. So this will show you that Europe appears to be leading the way. Obviously, you will see there is a lot of policy, regulation, and activity in Europe. So there is definitely a higher net positive balance when it comes to demand or investor demands for green buildings. But the spread is pretty intuitive in terms that you can see that markets that are leading and then markets that are upcoming in terms of rising demand, both significantly and modestly. And you will notice that the demand, falling demand is generally reducing over the globe. So next, I'd like to highlight some of the other key findings of our report. So as I mentioned, that the responses come from our commercial property monitor and our construction monitor. Some of the findings from the construction monitor relate to emissions. And but despite we knowing that about 40% of the process and energy related emissions come from our sector, The 4 years of our study still shows little evidence to suggest that the sector is meaningfully addressing this issue. So we're not seeing the progress that we would like to see in terms of various aspects of sustainability related workflows, processes, especially when it relates to decarbonization. So next, I'll share with you a little bit more information. This is a glimpse of what we found in this year's report. Remember that all 4 years, our questions have generally remained consistent, so we can see trend and movements in sentiments of our respondents. To me, one of the important questions that we ask each year is about embodied carbon. And you will see that there is still some effort needed to move us forward, even though we've seen this year some positive improvements. So the question relates to measuring embodied carbon emissions on projects, but more importantly, using that information to select material systems and components for projects and assets. So when we asked this question, 34% of the respondents stated that they do not use or measure embodied carbon. 22% would like to use to measure embodied carbon emissions. So that clearly takes us above 50% of the folks who are still not measuring embodied carbon. Another 24% have begun measuring embodied carbon, but they may be using it for reporting purposes, but they do not use it to significantly impact their decision making on the selection of materials, systems, and components. 21% measure embodied carbon on their projects and assets, and then use it to make decisions. This has gone up on an average for the past 3 years before this year. This has been around 15-16%. So that's definitely good news. It's a giant baby step, but there's more to do. So next, you will see more information from our survey, from our report. This year, we introduced a question on biodiversity, asking respondents whether they consider the impact on biodiversity when designing, planning, managing projects and assets. Generally, you will see from this slide, the news is not that great. Impact on biodiversity not being considered on a substantial proportion of projects. So not on any projects is about 39%, on less than 50% of projects is 20%. So you will see, or vice versa, it's about 60% of folks are still not considering biodiversity in their core decision-making processes. Next. We also, every year for the past 4 years, have asked our respondents about the key challenges, blockers, or barriers that they face in adopting sustainable practices. The top 3 this year, and this has been somewhat consistent, is the perceived high initial costs of sustainable and green building practices and materials. An important challenge also remains skill shortages, gaps in knowledge, and inadequate training of professionals, especially in areas such as carbon emissions calculations. RICS is now addressing skill shortages. We have introduced several new training programs, including a certificate program in whole life carbon assessment of using our second edition of the WLCA standard. Mindset issues, cultural issues also are generally considered in the top 3 barriers or blockers when it comes to adopting sustainable practices. Next. So I think as our recommendations in this report, these barriers can be overcome, we feel, through credible policy interventions, for example, mandating whole life carbon assessment for projects and assets, maybe initially in emerging markets using perhaps public projects first. Adoption of global standards such as our RICS Whole Life Carbon Assessment Second Edition standard, the International Cost Management Standard can also help in making sure that we are reporting, calculating, measuring, and reporting important aspects of sustainability using global international standards. Education and training programs will definitely help, and public-private partnerships will be needed to close the information and data gaps as well, because information and data also remains a significant challenge when it comes to adoption of sustainable practices. So I think with that, moving on to our next slide, I would like to now take the time to introduce our panelists. We've assembled global experts and thank them for really joining. So first, I will like to invite Frank Havorka. Frank is a part of the RICS Management Board. He's our sustainability chair. I'd really call him the global sustainability champion. He not only it sort of influences policy decision making, but he's a technical expert also. Welcome, Frank. I would love to hear briefly a little bit more about yourself.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Anil, for a very nice presentation. So yes, I'm very honored to be a management board member of RICS and in charge of the sustainability. And well, it's our duty with Anil to listen to the needs of our members in order to lead the path for RICS integration of sustainability. In this is where I will stop, because I worked in many fields, construction, investment, and I also had several positions in sustainability and finance in previous years. Thank you, Anil.
Thanks, Frank. Next, I'd like to invite Gulnara Rol, head of the Secretariat of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction at the UN Environment Program. Gulnara, your vision and leadership, I watched your video recording of your work at COP29. We're really honored for you to be on our panel, as well as RICS now working closely with Global ABC. So welcome. Would love to hear a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much, Anil, and dear colleagues, dear participants of the webinar. Thank you so much for this organization of this webinar, and I think for this very important report, where really, as head of the Secretariat of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, and also head of the Cities and Buildings Unit at the United Nations Environment Program, I'm really happy to be here, and indeed, Anil, to confirm that we have an excellent cooperation with RICS, and we really draw a lot on your expertise. What for us at United Nations Environment Program and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction is important is that we would like really to bring more of your expertise and also connect it to the work of the national, local governments, all other stakeholders, because we know that technical solutions exist, but only through the cooperation, through the intersectoral cooperation, we can achieve the goals. So I think this is what is important for us. So back to you, Anil.
Thank you, Laura. Next, I'd like to invite Sandeep Singh, who's Operations and Partnerships Lead for Green Buildings and Green Cities Program at the International Finance Corporation World Bank Group. Sandeep, welcome to the panel. We always love to collaborate with you and your team. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Anil. And hi, everyone. My name is Sandeep Singh. I work with International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. International Finance Corporation is probably the largest development finance institution focusing on the private sector developmental impact. I work with the Green Building and Green Cities team, which is, while IFC is a development finance institution, this is more on the advisory side, where we try to transition the built sector through our tools, which is, EDGE for green buildings, APEX for green cities, And then we have Building Resilience Index for the resilience in buildings. So those are the three things that we are working with. EDGE has been around for some time, and we are about to cross 100 million square meters of EDGE certified projects in more than 112 countries. And next year we'll be celebrating the 10th anniversary of EDGE. So hope to share some of those experiences with everyone in this session. Thanks for having me here today.
Thanks, Sandeep. Next, I'd like to invite Anna Zenecker, co-chair of Secretariat Partnership for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. Anna, welcome to the panel. Thank you for taking the time. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone, and also great to be here. I think busy end of the year as always, so it's great to have a bit of time to reflect. Quickly about myself, so I work for the Partnership for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, or PEEP. PEEP is basically a joint program. It's a collaboration between the French Development Bank, AFD, and then GIZ, so the provider of technical assistance and international cooperation on the German side. We're a global program, means we work with 21 countries at this point, and I think across the globe, so from Nigeria, Morocco, Indonesia, Argentina, I mean, really a bit worldwide. And so by now we have 2.2 billion euros worth of green buildings projects that we support. Many are public projects, but I think also a bit of a mix. But we also work on policies, we work on capacity building, and we kind of everything that's around there. And we also do analytical work to share this. A global program, I said it, I think like France and Germany are behind us, now also the Green Climate Fund, the EU Commission. And yeah, so I think it's really a global program, and also happy to say that I do chair the work area on finance of Global ABC. And yeah, I'm very happy to share a bit of the things we saw last year with that group. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think time to get us started. We have close to 450 registrations from 50 countries. I believe over 200 of you are online right now. So if you have any questions, please do submit those questions to our panel to make this conversation more lively and engaging. If you are new to these webinars, you should see that you can submit questions at any time using the question box on your screen. We'll pick these up as many as possible, and I'll try to weave them in our discussion. So let's begin with our set of questions that we had prepared to get the discussion going. I'd also like to thank our WBEF team, Kisa, who's the author of this report, our economics team, to get us going on the 4th year of our report. So let me begin by giving you the sort of a round robin. All of you please chip in. To what extent has 2024 been a year of progress for sustainability in the built environment, and what have been the main driver and biggest challenges? You can share with us your experiences. So perhaps we'll go in the same order: Frank, Gulnara, Sandeep, and Anna.
Wow, thank you very much, Anil, for such a broad question. Well, what I would say, and it's also based on the conference that we had last week with RICS team and the worldwide impact on sustainability, is a kind of mixed feeling. Because in one hand, as you have seen, you get the feeling from the report that the sustainability is a little bit less in terms of importance in the different areas in real estate. It's less important, but I think it's linked also to a way that it's more embedded now in the way we work. And just to quote our colleagues from US, and maybe Anil, you could also say if I'm wrong or not. I have a feedback that in US, for example, for regulatory reasons, some companies and people have stepped back from sustainability in the front, but in the work we do every day, they have really taken into account the sustainability impact, climate change, impact of climate change, resilience, obsolescence, life cycle assessment, and carbon impact. So, well, it could give a feeling that in some results of a survey, you could have a feeling that it's less important than it was. But I would interpret it that it's even the opposite. It's much more important because it's, as in, for example, in continental Europe, it's embedded in the with usual business and day as day working. And in other countries, it's also the fact that it's embedded in the work, but less visible in terms of, let's say, regulation in some other areas. Thank you, Anil.
Thanks, Frank. Gulnara, over to you.
Thank you. Well, the main driver, of course, that we're looking at the climate actions, and we cannot really speak about the building and construction sector without speaking about progress in the climate negotiations. And they also have, maybe, as referring to what Frank said, we have mixed feelings about the progress of the COP29 negotiations. At one hand, of course, there was an agreement to triple finance to developing countries, but at the same time, on all the mitigation issues, there was no really very clear progress. And this is very much kind of drives also the progress in the sector. And in relation to that, as the global status report on buildings and construction shows, the building sector emissions have not been reducing for past 7 years. So there is no real trend in reduction of emissions and energy intensity on the sector. It is now 11% above the required targets. And we really need to work much more to decrease by 37% by 2030. So it's a lot to be done. It's good news and bad news. It's bad news because the emissions are not reducing. But in a way, the good news is that in the situation when there is so much of the construction, we actually managed to slow the trend. I think that's important. But as the UNEP emissions gap report shows, that we are not really going to the 1.5 degree decrease. We are kind of more on the 2 degree right now. So we really need to work much more on the governance, materials, finance to achieve the goals. So we really need to speed up, and we don't really see that we're speeding up.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Thanks, Anil. Yeah, in terms of progress in this year, I think it has been generally in the right direction. Quite some milestones achieved, but sometimes the progress doesn't go in a linear fashion. So what I mean is that sometimes it feels like we go 2 steps forward and a step backward, and especially given the current geopolitical situations, that has impact too. But there are quite a few positive things. I think the Buildings Breakthrough initiative, we had like almost 70 countries sign up. It is still a matter of them taking action, but at least there is ink on the paper, and they're moving in the right direction. Generally, the narrative has been strong, as you mentioned in the report, on things like embodied carbon and whole life cycle approach. You mentioned that it has gone up from 16% to 21%. But what I've seen in my interactions is that the general awareness about whole life carbon and embodied carbon is gaining traction overall. Whether people start using it is the next step. So another positive thing is, I think, on the resilience side, there is the narrative is much stronger. We started Building Resilience Initiative about 3 years back, but only in this year that we are hearing interest from participants, developers, donors, so all sides. But still there is it's still like scratching a surface. So generally speaking, I think we are moving in the right direction, but we are not moving at the right pace. So if we don't move at the right pace, the goalpost or the destination keeps getting farther away. So we have to do that much more extra effort to get there. So I think the need of the hour is to now gain momentum and actually start implementing. Back to you, Anil.
Thanks, Sandeep. Anna, your point of view.
Yeah, I can just add to that. And I think also thank you for giving us a bit the time to think and reflect, no? Because I think 2024 was quite a year. So when I said, I was like, yeah, I kind of like, you mentioned geopolitics, then I think political systems, I think how AI is changing what we do, how we communicate. I think there's so many things that really, how do you say, kept us very busy in a way. And at the same time, I think we're all trying to move towards sustainability and also seeing how to make homes well, safe, you know, and stable to withstand kind of a warming planet. And when I thought about this, like glass half full, glass half empty, I mean, I think it's both. I mean, there was a really, I mean, the year had a lot of highlights. I mean, I remember like there was the conference on buildings and climate in Paris in March. I think this was a very energizing moment where that community came together and like really thought about what's policies, what can be done. I think Sandeep mentioned the buildings breakthrough, climate targets. We have a global target on doubling energy efficiency. So I think there is this recognition and momentum, and that's really great. We could also see it in what countries put in their own climate targets, because there's one thing what they discuss at the climate summits, and then there's what they put as targets themselves. I mean, so far, I think we counted, it's 84% of countries, 167 countries already have something on buildings, and now is a revision of these targets. So I think they're trying to make that even more, let's say, firm in terms of implementation. And we also see this in terms of what countries are already having put in place in terms of policy. So I think this is really very much for the glass half full side. Yeah, but then, I mean, it was mentioned, Gunara said it, I think emissions are at the highest. And we just see, I mean, I think it takes time to lay the groundwork. No, I think for companies to really acquire the skills, being able to measure, being able to act on these measurements, new legislation takes a very long time. So I would say kind of like we're on a good path. And we just, you know, shouldn't like run out of breath on that path. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Believe it or not, very positive news. We already have a question from the audience, but I'm going to bring that in, weave that in as we move forward. So moving to our next question, how is the real estate sector responding to sustainability drivers and challenges of the next 5 years and beyond? For this, I'm going to put Sandeep on the spot, ask him to take that big picture and connect these drivers and challenges, perhaps using Edge as an example, influencing especially emerging markets, not only at the individual project asset, but at the portfolio and perhaps even broader district and city levels.
Thanks, Anil. Yeah, so in terms of the big picture, you know, I think most of us know the data. The total built space in the world today will be double by the year 2060. So that's like, you know, we are going to build the entire world one more time in the next, you know, 3.5 decades. And 80% of that is going to be in emerging markets. So unless we do the new construction right in emerging markets, you know, we're not really going to move the needle too much. So that's one side of it. But then again, you know, the X that is already built, I'm talking about 2X in 2060, the X that already built, that needs very active retrofit measures. So when you think about it from a real estate industry perspective, or rather a real estate owner, there are essentially 3 stakeholders that you are influenced by. You have your clients, your tenants or your buyers, you have the government, which makes the policies, and then you have your investors. Between these 3 stakeholders, you know, there is this influence, and you know, fortunately, there is momentum on all 3 sides, you know, so the larger so now, if you have this kind of 3 stakeholder picture and think about it in the social pyramid structure, the top part of the pyramid is getting taken care of. There is awareness activity all around, but it's the middle and the bottom part which needs more momentum. So, and for that, I think while the private sector is making a strong push, which is more on the organized side, but the not so organized sector needs to be brought into the fold, and that can happen through policy intervention from the government side. When we talk about this entire 80% of the new growth will come in emerging markets, when we talk about policy, the penalties and think of it in carrots and sticks. The sticks won't work so well. It's the carrot that needs to work. So there need to be incentives, and that brings me to the point of cities. So when you think about real estate in general, almost always it's the city government that defines the construction industry's policies, building bylaws, and things like that. Of course, there is the national government policies also matter, but that is where I think we need some more initiative, ways to influence the city governments to bring in the right incentive-oriented policies to transition the entire industry and not just the leaders of the industry towards green. So one of the ways that can happen is through blended finance instruments where we lend the government, city governments with overall emissions reduction targets, or not even reduction targets, maybe just action-based targets. And that can influence them to introduce policy measures which they are otherwise ignoring, and they have no incentive to introduce policy measures like, all new construction should be at least 40% efficient compared to the baseline and things like that. So that's a general layout of where we are and what's needed. Back to you, Anil.
Thank you, Sandeep. I think, Gulnara, you have this global view since you work with the recently formed intergovernmental panel that I think was also met during COP29. How do you see the big picture, these sustainability drivers and challenges?
Thank you so much, but I will probably continue on what Sandeep also said, that indeed, in order to promote the sustainability, we need to have a combination of energy efficiency measures in retrofits and new constructions, but also kind of smarter building practices and materials. Also, I would like to highlight all the funds and efforts to be directed to the topics of heating, cooling, ventilation, because we are facing really the extreme heat as well. And, more it goes, we are trying to cool the planet as well. So, and this requires electricity in own way. So this is also will be kind of a huge increase in terms of energy intensity, so definitely this would be the topic. Financial investments will be very important. Already now, the estimations show that we need over 2 trillion per year of the investments by 2035 in order to achieve the goals. So innovative financing instruments indeed will be very, very important. We do quite a lot on regulatory instruments. So, and I saw in the chat the question was also about maybe conflicting building standards. And this is where we at UNEP, but also with many other organizations working on, for instance, national roadmaps on buildings, where we try to ensure that there is a systematic approach to laws, regulations, emission standards, building sector regulations, so that we do it in very integrated and integrated way to reduce energy use, both in buildings, but also what Sandeep mentioned, the cities. So we shouldn't be looking today at the buildings as isolated kind of entities. So we also at UNEP also looking into into more kind of integrated approach. And finally, I think Anna earlier also mentioned the importance of the national determined contributions, because today I think the word is a lot about multi-level governance, so integration of what we do at the building level, at the city level, at the regional level with the national determined contributions. We need really to work together, and this is, there is already discussion about this, how we include all this work on regulations, on better building construction practices and materials into the national determined contributions, because they will be driving the progress in getting buildings greener.
Thanks, Gulnar. I know Sandeep mentioned investors and ESG. Frank, you've done a lot of work with the European or RICS, European World Region Board. Do you want to briefly touch upon the ESG and the data related to ESG, the work that you've done in Europe?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's quite connected to all of that was said previously, because when you want to act on climate change impact and greenhouse gas emission, you need to measure. So you need to measure with the same definition of square meters, same definition of carbon emissions. And I think, Anil, you mentioned the whole life cycle carbon assessment standard of RICS linked to the ICMS3. I think it's key. And what is key also in the work we have done at continental Europe is to define, let's say, a dozen of key performance indicators: energy consumption, greenhouse gas emission, biodiversity, circularity, in order to agree together on the indicators we would like to use together. And I think we released, it's on the RICS website, a report beginning of a year on key indicators that we're going to use in continental Europe. And more or less, it's the same indicators that could be used everywhere in order to address this approach on ESG. Well, I think first we focused on the E and the environmental key performance indicators in order to go forward with the overall governance and social impacts further on. But if we agree on the indicators, if we are transparent on the sources and the accuracy and reliability of this information, transparency is key, because you need to express how you calculated it and how reliable is the information. Because if you want to speak with investors, banks, or other stakeholders, it needs to be clear where the data is coming from and how the data is reliable. So it's really linked to that. And that's why it will be used more and more. I think it's push and pull. It will be pulled by the regulation, of course, but it will be also pushed by the market, because we all agree that the climate change, it's a matter of speed of climate change. And the speed means that it will increase the risk and the obsolescence, the possible obsolescence of buildings and infrastructures. So what was, let's say, with a lifespan of 100 years, a century ago, maybe today it will have only a lifespan of 20 years, because it could be tackled by climate events, floods, flooding, fire, whatever. So it really will have a great impact, and everything, the market, whatever they say officially and whatever regulation will be, will more and more use these indicators and this information in order to address the risk, because for climate change is a matter of speed. So if the obsolescence is going faster, you need to address this risk of speed of obsolescence. So I think it's answering also the question about the indicators and the standards. Whatever the standards will be, the key performance indicators and the way you express the information will be the way the market will expect you to give information back, not only through standards, certification, or whatever. And to answer the other question, yes, it will increase maybe the cost, but it will decrease the risk. So it's a matter of balance between the cost of construction and the risk of a construction to be obsolete in the coming years or not. So I really think that the way we are today in the 5 years, and I will stop on that, is how do we translate these informations, these data, these key performance indicators into a valuation process and the expression of risk, which is clearly the key word for the next 5 years in terms of climate change impact.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the responses. I think it's the questions are just coming in very fast. It's important that I try and weave those in, especially when we are talking about above buildings and portfolio scale cities and countries. And thank you for agreeing to address this question. A question from Sergey is that do you see Ukraine as a potential testing ground for various green technologies after the fighting stops and the country gains long-term peace? Before you start, I must say that RICS is working closely with the Reconstruction Group and an external consultant on supporting the use of RICS new rules of measurement, which is a classification system for construction. We are also supporting and providing technical information on ICMS, which is a taxonomy for cost and carbon integration. So Anna, any views that you have?
Yeah, Sergey, thank you very much for your question. And I immediately wanted to respond because, I mean, for me, Ukraine is always one of the countries where we have a lot of like extremely qualified colleagues working on green buildings for a long time. So I think there was a lot of work with municipalities. And I know like Ukraine has like a revolving fund to renovate. And I think, so you already have a lot of like the instruments in place. And I mean, I think I object a bit against the word testing ground, but I think definitely, I think there is a lot of need, but I think there's also really a lot of the basis to work from. And I think there's the issue of reconstruction, there's the issue of renovation, and I absolutely think, let's hope for peace first, and then already start thinking about reconstruction. I think these discussions are already going on between countries, and yes, definitely, I think there will be a very good case for green buildings, I think, coming out of Ukraine. And yeah, I'm very, very proud of our colleagues that we have there. So thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
I could also add that actually UNEP has an office in Kiev, and indeed we're looking into this longer term approach to reconstruction. So we're already having a project on the asbestos removal as a part of the refurbishment and reconstruction. We are now working on a project on urban energy, where exactly, I think this is what we discussed in the previous question. We're trying to bring together, buildings, given there is no centralized energy sources in many cases, we're trying really to use very efficiently energy, trying to bring both supply and demand and energy. So it's refurbishment of buildings, but also transport and urban planning. So lots of work is taking place, so please get in touch with us.
Thank you. I think I'm going to maybe at this stage also address another question which talks about standards. Obviously, in order to measure, report, reduce, improve, you need a methodology of measuring. Take the example, as Frank mentioned, of measuring emissions from our projects and assets. There are quite a few standards out there. Obviously, the RICS WLCA standard 2nd edition, which is globally applicable, uses that whole of life approach for whole of assets. But there is this issue of alignment between standards, harmonization between standards, and also bringing clarity as to what standards work for different maybe building types and infrastructure types. So it's crucial when we talk about comparing, benchmarking, and reporting that there is some harmonization between perhaps local, regional jurisdictions and these international global standards. RICS is doing some work in this area. We work with Gulnara's team, Global ABC, and the Buildings Breakthrough Agenda on Priority Action B1, Standards and Certifications, in which we're trying to connect standards and their harmonization to this overarching goal of near zero emission and resilient buildings by 2030, becoming sort of the mainstream. There is also work going on with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development through their market transformation action agenda in terms of standards, certifications, and data. So I think we've addressed those questions. Frank kindly addressed the issue of cost, because what we think of today's first cost may not necessarily be the best decision maker in terms of whole life cost, including issues related to resilience and adaptation. Frank, do you have anything else you want to add on that?
Yes, I think it's linked also to the questions, because, well, of course, if you look at the usual way of investment, you look at cost. What happens now because of climate change, because of what I mentioned in terms of adaptation to this speed of climate change, people will more and more look at risk, and also look at greenhouse gas emission in terms of what we were used to use in our financial approach, return on investment. Well, I think in the coming years, people will look at return on carbon. How many carbon do I invest in order to save the carbon that I will use in terms of energy consumption in the coming years? So we have the financial tools that could be easily adapted to the way of thinking like that. And clearly, we see that in continental Europe, and I think it could be very useful. We spoke about it also with Ukraine, because we had some meetings with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also to use this feeling about efficiency, linking infrastructures and buildings, and also looking at, in return on investment, of course, but return on carbon investment. So how many carbon do I invest in my building or infrastructure, and what will be the emission in the next decades? Because you have to have this balance in mind, because it doesn't make sense to try to save your carbon or your investment today if you will have to adapt at a very high cost in the next decade, or if you have to emit a lot of greenhouse gas because of your energy consumption. So this kind of equation, I think, will really be the hot topic of the coming 5 years.
Yeah, so moving on to our next question here, that really talks about, again, I think we have covered in our previous question itself, the next question, which talks about investors, owners, and occupiers, how important are green buildings becoming, and what are the regional differences we are seeing. I think we pretty much addressed that question. Unless anyone has any outstanding points that they would like to make, I'd want to go to the next question. Any volunteers? Anna, do you want to add anything? Sure, please.
Sure, absolutely. But I think, there is a few thoughts I wanted to share. Because I think, like, we covered the question about, like, are people looking for a green building, or are they more looking into cost, risk, etc. When they get a building? And I thought your report was really interesting in the regional differences as well. No, I think because it's well, we see Europe with a tightening regulation, but then we also see a bit of a mixed picture in other countries. And I think it's really interesting to see what's happening there, because in many countries, the green buildings are still very much a niche. No? And I think the big question we need to address is, beyond that market that they have conquered already, like how can they become a lot more mainstream, and how can they get to scale? And I think this really links to something that also came out in the questions, this question of, like, how to make things transparent and kind of, like, putting, like, a value to something you can't see otherwise. How resilient is it, or, like, how efficient is it? But also that question of ease. And I think there is a bit of a balance we need to strike. I think we became a lot better with methodologies, and then there's a bit of a question of, like, how we break it down and kind of, like, reach the wider market, because I think the reality is, I think in some of the countries where we work, like most of the buildings do not involve an architect when they're built. No? So I think there's really a question of like, how do you also address this segment and how to make it easy? And maybe just something I wanted to share also with the colleagues here. So I think the work on finance is going to be really important. So one thing we had coming out also of the climate negotiations is on the one hand, the work on carbon markets. So I think that's also a bit of an evolving field where we might see, I mean, we'll be working on this next year on the question of how could you design buildings project for carbon markets to access another stream of financing, especially in emerging countries. And I think this is going to be, yeah, I think we need the methodologies and we really need to see how we make something very robust and watertight. Yeah, so just to say, I think this is an important question to see how we work together globally and in different country contexts to really kind of like, yeah, get out of that niche and really get to scale. Thanks. That was my thought.
Thank you so much. We'll move. Oh, sorry, Gulnara, go ahead.
No, just, I mean, I think this is an important topic because the report looks so much into the regional differences. And at UNEP, of course, we're working a lot in Africa and Asia, where you see the situation is very, very different from continental Europe. I mean, it's over 70% of the building stock in Africa, for instance, is to be built. And today, 80% of the sub-Saharan Africa residents don't have access even to electricity. And 80% of people live still, now over half of African residents live still in formal housing. So it's a completely different landscape. So probably what Anna is saying, but different approaches, methodologies that needed. But one of the issues is construction materials. So how to get more, carbon neutral construction materials. So you need really to look into the whole value chain. So I think this regional differences topic is very important. But Anil, of course, I stop here.
Thank you so much. I was given one task, which was to manage time. I think I'm not doing that great on time right now, but the discussion has been very insightful. So one positive there. Moving to our next question. And given the amount of time we have left, I'm going to request each speaker to maybe try and do it in 30 seconds. How is the construction sector responding to the sustainability drivers and challenges of the 5 years and beyond? You saw we listed some blockers, skills relating to policy regulation and those data perhaps and other blockers. So may I request Gulnara and Frank to very briefly address these issues, and others can chip in as well. Go ahead, Gulnara.
We spoke quite a lot about this already, that kind of the integration of materials, technologies, renewable energy sources, that would be really very important to make sure that we're actually achieving the goals. And as I mentioned again, that buildings are not isolated entities, but integrated components of the larger ecosystem. So I think this is two topics that I would bring.
Yeah, thank you, Gulnara. Very briefly, Frank, before we go to the next question. And there are other questions from the audience as well.
Yes, of course. Well, I think what we need to tackle here is the shift of the way we build, because we will build with different materials, different processes. And it also means something that we didn't spoke here for the moment, two very important topics. We will need to change the contractualization and the way we make the contract. If we want to accelerate the speed of integration of sustainability topics, we need to change the contract and to integrate into the contract new processes that take into account the performance and the carbon emission and the lifespan of a building. A building has a lifespan, and it has to be written in the contract. And the second topic I want to tackle here is the use of digital tools. Digitalization, modeling, even if it is a small building, even if it's in a developing country, no matter, it's really useful to accelerate also and to create the data transparency that built the trust between the stakeholders, construction companies, investors, users, banks, and whatever. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to our next question, which talks about real estate and construction sectors. How important is, I think now we need to sort of step out and also start thinking about adaptation and resilience. Our board has given us the four focus areas in sustainability: decarbonization, resilience, circularity, and biodiversity. So looking at that, what do you think is the current challenges, issues? I will start with Anna, and then Gulnara and Sandeep.
Super, yeah, and I think I hope I'm helping our moderator by also addressing a question on emerging markets and how economic development might be much more of a target rather than sustainability and climate. So I would say we can't separate really. I mean, if you talk to like a teacher teaching in a school, that's like unusable for several months of the year, or for someone who's considering, can I still live or work in my building? I think this is a very essential question, this is kind of the flip side of everything we also want to do in the question on energy efficiency, sustainability. I think in the end, it's about having really good buildings that satisfy all the needs that we have. And also to say, I mean, we're financed by, let's say, climate concerns, and I think this is very much something our program addresses. But like to many of our partner countries, I think the issue might be economic. I mean, like what happens in the construction market? What happens? I mean, can people work well in the buildings that we build? What's the impact on jobs and labor? So I think I would not separate them out. I think it's not either or, but it's really a question of like, how can we define the targets and how can we reach them with what we have? Thanks.
Who else would like to add to that?
Well, I just wanted maybe to stress that, as we saw at COP, there is still not enough money, enough funds committed to mitigation measures. So when mitigation measures are not working, we have to adapt. So this is why the adaptation discussion is very big globally. It's growing because we need to adapt to the increasing temperatures, extreme heat, floods, and lots of discussion about this. And at UNEP, we're working on a number of kind of pilot projects. We're looking into kind of ecosystem approach, how to ensure that we basically check all the boxes, improve the livelihoods, improve the resilience at the city or neighborhood level, but also ensure that the city or the buildings prepared for climate. And what we see, I mean, for instance, we had big projects in Cambodia and Vietnam, for instance. It's not. It's quite a lot of different activities that you need to do, right? To ensure the resilience, you need to have this ecosystem approach about like you cannot plant every tree. What is also important is skills, and I think the skills topic was also mentioned in the sustainability report. The skills for building resilient buildings is the key, because this is much more technically complex. Testing different techniques is also very important. The topics of building codes and also information of homeowners and residents, that will be very, very important if we speak about resilient buildings.
Thank you. Sandeep, anything to add, especially from the IFC app on BRI?
Yes, thanks, Anil. I'm very conscious of the lack of time, but IFC has developed this tool called Building Resilience Index. You can go to the website resilience-index.org. it is a very user-friendly self-assessment tool, but it kind of solves some of the problems that Gulnara was talking about. That how do you assess a building? So it basically, looking at a building's location and typology, it creates a map of hazard map. What are the risks that the building is exposed to, and then you can use the user-friendly interface to check or uncheck, will the building retain its integrity in case of a hazard? And then the next level is, can it continue to operate even though it retains its integrity? So this self-assessment, of course, it's eventually verified by a professional verifier. It can help you rate a building either as non-resilient or resilient to what extent. So I'll just stop there. I'm very conscious of the time. So, but please do visit resilienceindex.org.
Thank you so much. We've been given 5 more minutes, so
Okay.
We can probably punch in some important points. Moving to the next question, which I think we've already addressed, but I'm going to just say that measuring, tracking, evaluating sustainability progress, for example, whole life carbon assessment is extremely important. RICS at the Paris conference in 2024 released a report on harmonization of global, a set of principles that will help harmonize measurement globally. So moving to our next question, which is really our last question. And sort of you can treat that as your closing statement as well. So as we head into 2025, what New Year's resolution would you like built environment stakeholders to make and keep to further sustainability? So we'll probably request Sandeep, then Frank, Anna, and then Gulnara to close out with this, perhaps 30 to 45 seconds each, please.
Sure. I think I'll kind of summarize this in terms of what the wish list is. And again, going back to the 3 stakeholder model, which is basically the clients, the investors, and the governments. I think for the top of the pyramid, the more organized sector is moving towards sustainability in a reasonably good manner. But even in the developed countries, it's the slightly more unorganized sector is not really moving. And I think there is need for like a collaborated effort from the private sector side and the policymaking side to make a holistic change, to take a holistic approach. I earlier alluded to it. Cities typically control the policies, and there is a need for cities to take action, but cities generally are struggling with providing the basic civic amenities to their citizens. But if the private sector and especially the development finance industry can support them through blended finance instruments so that they can take a more holistic view. And what I would like to refer here is the Green Cities platform that we have. It's called Apex, apexcities.com, where we help a city assess its entire GHG footprint and then help them prioritize which actions will help them reduce. And the good thing is that the civic problems that they're trying to tackle with and the GHG reduction, the solutions are the same. They just need to be a little more focused on including that, and that is where blended finance can come in. And if there is that policy intervention, we can tackle the middle and the bottom of the pyramid well, especially in emerging markets. I'll stop there. Back to you.
Thanks, Sandeep. Frank?
Well, as we know, at the global level, from different reports like Lord's, Nicolas Stern, or other, the cost of doing nothing, or working as usual, is more expensive than acting to adapt to decrease the greenhouse gas emission. So I remember a work we did a decade ago with UNEP FI, and the motto was from the boiler room to the boardroom. So my wish is really all helping the market to translate this technical information about sustainability, greenhouse gas emission, climate resilience, adaptation, mitigation into the financial decision process, and really integrating into the financial decision process for an investment, for a customer to buy a house, or for a big company to invest in a huge investment in an infrastructure, in an airport, to integrate this data and to really look at this risk that they are taking to do the business as usual, where what will happen? They will create a broad discount on their asset and a fast decreasing of value, and maybe these assets which are done as usual will be destroyed in a very short term period because they are not resilient enough. So my wish is really to help and to work on integration and translation of this data into the financial decision process.
Thanks, Frank. Anna?
And I'm a bit tempted to say, take a deep breath and take good rest, and then keep going, because we're in it for the long run. But if I'm serious, it's just think about how to make it easy and then make it big, because I think that's what we need. Thanks.
Thank you. Gulnara?
Yes, I guess upscaling this is definitely key topic. As head of Secretariat of the Global Alliance Building Construction, I think we would like to help also our members to upscale their solutions, because we see amazing best practices. So my wish is really to strengthen cooperation with the Global ABC, which has today 340 members. I'm very happy that this year we established a group of cities, so subnational action group on Global ABC, so strengthen this one. And finally, at COP29, there was an official inauguration of the Intergovernmental Council for Building and Climate, which is an intergovernmental platform helping the governments to achieve climate goals in the building construction sector. So working on that and making sure that we strengthen that cooperation and strengthen the commitments of the national governments and actions of national governments to, upscale the existing solutions. This is my kind of 3 Christmas wishes.
Thank you so much. I think, as somebody said, this is a never-ending marathon, so we can't stop running. We have to keep running. I look forward to the assembly, the Global Assembly of Global ABC, I believe in April, and then COP30, and all the ongoing work. I think collaboration is key. With that, I think we're going to bring a close to this session. So I'd like to first thank our panel. We also want to remind you that the recording would be available for this webinar, and a summary would be available on our website. So please do share this across various networks. We have some future webinars upcoming. One of them, I believe jointly with Sandeep, IFC, World Bank. We also want to share that you can go to our website to get more information about our reports, our standards, practice information, news, insights, and other training programs. So with that, I would like to once again thank the panel members, all our participants. We will try and address some of your questions in our written blog or article that will appear on our website. Thank you very much for joining. Until next time, goodbye.